To this now, Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Higher Education has concluded that there was no formal panel that selected the 21 politically connected individuals appointed as SETA board chairpersons. This comes just a day after former Higher Education Minister Nobuhle Nkabane was fired following allegations that she misled Parliament about the panel's existence. Aside from her advisor, Asisipo Solane, 4 of the 5 alleged panel members telling Parliament today that they were not involved in the selection process. Now, despite calls from the ANC and the Patriotic Alliance to drop the matter following Nkabane's dismissal, the members of Parliament voted to continue with the inquiry. Departmental officials will now be asked to account for their roles in the appointments. The committee found that while there may have been the intention to set up a panel, it ultimately never existed. Let's get some perspective now. Join me in studio, senior Newzroom Afrika politics reporter, Qaanitah Hunter. Qaanitah, good evening to you once again. This is the perfect start, it would seem. Why come up with a panel that never existed in the first place? Listening to that committee meeting today,
yes,
it appears that there is no regulation forcing the minister to set up such a panel. So why build this fiction in the first place?
So that was what Nobuhle Nkabane, the chairperson of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Higher Education, concluded the meeting with, to say that by law, the minister did not have to set up a panel. The law is loose as it stands, that the minister must appoint people and kind of just come up with some justification as to how they appoint these nominees for SETA board chairpersons. And so it's quite a fascinating process. You'd recall that this has been going on for more than 4 months now. The 21 names made it to the public domain. MPs were livid. How did people like Gwede Matashe Sang? How did people like the now Deputy Minister Nomusa Dube made it to that list? Other politically appointed, connected individuals made it to that list. And then the minister was hauled before Parliament to ask, how was that, where did you get these names from? And she says, well, it's not my names, it's names from a panel. And then when she was asked who was on that panel, you'd remember that moment where she said, Google what an eminent panel is. You'd recall the gum chewing incident of the time. And then subsequently to that, the Parliament persisted in its efforts to say, well, tell us who was on that panel. And by constantly, sitting on her case and her sending that list, etc., over a course of weeks now, it's finally come to this conclusion that everyone's saying, well, yes, we may have been told about it, or, there was a DDG of corporate services. She would have been the secretariat. She says, I was essentially the secretary of this panel, and I didn't call any meetings. And so, Nobuhle, let's say, concluding the meeting by saying, there's just no panel. Let's take a listen.
In real terms, there was no independent panel. That is the first thing we must agree on. Maybe there was an intention to have a panel, but it was not implemented in a true sense of the word.
So the inquiry continues in part because Nkabane, yes, she may have been fired as Minister of Higher Education, but she remains a member of Parliament. So in all probability, she will still be hauled before this inquiry.
To the Ethics Committee. To
the Ethics Committee. All right. The officials, though, what role did they play here? Is that what the substance of the inquiry will probably be from here on?
I think there was a comment made by the EFF, Sihle Lonzi, that painted a very good picture of why this process is important. It's because Parliament has to look at strengthening governance processes. And there's obviously something entirely flawed with the minister sort of just coming up with names. You know that SETAs have been regarded as cash cows. They've just become these sort of looting troughs for politically connected individuals. And there has to be greater accountability. And so the question now is, yes, it may be about Nkabane and how she came up with these names and whether or not she manufactured the existence of a panel. But beyond this, what laws need to be changed? And this was the discussion that was had with the DG, when the DG was put under fire to say, what do you know about this process? And he says, well, I may have had some idea, I didn't know what officials were doing because that was not my process, it was the minister's process. The DG in Qaanitah Hunter conceding to say, I wish it was in my powers to appoint SETA board members, then, change the law in some way. And so, the role of the advisor to the minister, Asisibo Solani, was also a very important one because he was the one that said, yes, there was a panel. I went to speak to Terry Matau. And so the MPs really grilled him to say, what were you doing? Why were you speaking to Terry Matau, Advocate Terry Matau SC, if he was not yet appointed? And so a whole lot of sloppy, if you like, processes and conversations that happened. At the end of the day, there was no panel, and that it speaks to the lack of accountability. And again, we've seen this in the past where members of the executive flippantly say things to Parliament and get into hot water as a result. You'd know that, one Tony Ngeni sort of got into trouble for lying to Parliament. We also know that there was a minister, Batabile Dlamini, who faced criminal charges for perjury in a separate process. The point is that it is not a laughing matter for a minister to go to Parliament and simply, make up a process to cover her tracks at the time. And so the question is really about accountability. There's a Hawks process that's underway. We don't know what will come out of that, but also an ethics committee and the higher education committee, all realizing the importance of governance transformation in the space, and them saying that they're looking forward to Buti Manamela's participation and as the new minister, and expressing some confidence in what he can do for the sector.
Well, we are going to be talking to Universities South Africa CEO, Dr. Petiwe Matutu, because as one expert put it this afternoon, that perhaps the former minister lacked the understanding of the portfolio that she was appointed into. So more conversations around this.